My son's fiancée leaned toward her mother at our dinner table and whispered in Russian, "This pathetic old fool has no idea what's happening. He actually thinks I love his boring son. Just wait until we get the house." She laughed softly, covering her mouth with her napkin. What she didn't know was that I understood every single word. I spent 23 years with the RCMP, 12 of them working organized crime cases involving Eastern European networks. My Russian was as sharp as my English, but I said nothing. I smiled and passed the breadbasket. What I heard next made me realize I had to protect my son from the most dangerous woman he'd ever met. Before I tell you what happened at that table, let me know in the comments. Where are you watching from today? The smell of cedar and rain drifted through the open window of my home in North Vancouver that November evening. At 64 years old, I'd perfected my mother's recipe for tourtière over decades of cooking for my late wife Catherine and our son Marcus. Tonight felt different. Tonight I was meeting the woman my son wanted to marry, a Russian-Canadian woman named Svetlana Petrov, along with her mother, who had immigrated from St. Petersburg 15 years ago. What Marcus didn't know, what nobody in my family knew, was that I had spent over 2 decades in law enforcement, much of it focused on international crime syndicates. My Russian was precise enough to conduct interrogations without a translator, a skill I had kept hidden even from my own family. Some habits from the job never fade. "Dad, they're here!" Marcus's excitement was contagious as I opened the door to Svetlana and her mother. She stood there like something from a magazine, perfectly polished with a practiced smile that I recognized immediately. I'd seen that smile before, on the faces of people who wanted something. "Mr. Harrison, thank you so much for having us," Svetlana said, handing me a bottle of wine. "Your home is absolutely beautiful. Marcus talks about you constantly. He adores you." Behind her, Irina Petrov nodded with a formal courtesy that reminded me of diplomatic functions from my RCMP days. "Please, call me Robert," I replied, stepping aside. "And thank you. Catherine always loved a good Niagara Red." Marcus practically glowed as he guided Svetlana through our living room. "Dad, Svetlana works at a nonprofit downtown. She helps refugees settle in Vancouver. She volunteers at the food bank every weekend, too." "How wonderful," I said, genuinely trying to be impressed. "That must be rewarding work." "Oh, it really is," Svetlana replied, her eyes lighting up in a way that seemed rehearsed, helping people find their footing in a new country, watching them build new lives. It makes everything worthwhile, you know? Dinner began beautifully. The tourtière was perfect. The conversation flowed easily. Irina asked about my woodworking hobby in the garage. Svetlana complimented the photographs of Catherine on the mantel. She hung on every word Marcus said about their wedding plans. "We're thinking June," Marcus said, cutting into his pie. "Maybe at Stanley Park. Svetlana wants cherry blossoms in the photos." "That sounds perfect, son," I said, raising my glass of wine. "To new beginnings." Everything changed during dessert. Svetlana leaned toward her mother and switched to Russian. Her voice dropped to what she thought was a whisper, but my trained ears caught every word. What I heard made my blood run cold. "This old idiot has no clue," she said. "The son is so desperate for love, he'll believe anything. Once we're married, we get him to co-sign for the mortgage. Then we file for divorce after 2 years. I keep the house, you move in, and this fool can die alone wondering what happened." The casual cruelty in her voice, the way she spoke to her mother like they were business partners reviewing a plan rather than family at dinner, hit me like a physical blow. I tightened my grip on my coffee cup. Adrenaline coursed through my veins, the same feeling I'd had during undercover operations decades ago. Every instinct screamed at me to stand up and confront her right there. But years of police work had taught me patience. I forced my face to remain neutral, even managed to smile when Svetlana looked my way. "The apple pie is delicious, Mr. Harrison," Svetlana said in English, switching back to her sweet voice. "You simply must give me the recipe. I'd love to make this for Marcus." "Of course, dear," I replied, my voice steady despite the fury building inside me. "Catherine would have loved to share it with you." As the evening wound down, I played the gracious host. I thanked them for coming, accepted their compliments on the meal, promised we'd do it again soon. Marcus walked them to their car, completely oblivious to what had happened at his father's table. When he came back inside, his face was flushed with happiness. Dad, thank you. This means everything to me. I can tell you really like her. I nodded and squeezed his shoulder, not trusting myself to speak. As I watched him drive away, I stood in the doorway of my home, feeling the cool November air clearing my head. She thought I was a fool. She had no idea I understood every word. The smell of sawdust and wood stain filled my garage workshop the next morning, mixing with the autumn air coming through the cracked door. I'd been working on a rocking chair for nearly an hour, but my hands moved on autopilot. Sleep had been impossible all night. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard Svetlana's voice again. Pathetic old fool. Desperate for love. Die alone. The words echoed in my head like a broken record. Each repetition stoked the fire of anger I'd been trying to contain. 35 years of marriage to Catherine had taught me patience, but this was different. My son's future was at stake. The crunch of gravel on the driveway interrupted my thoughts. Marcus's truck pulled up, and I watched through the window as he grabbed 2 cups of coffee from the passenger seat. My boy was always thoughtful. He got that from his mother. "Morning, Dad," he called out, ducking under the half-open garage door. His face wore the same glow it had all week. "Thought you might need some caffeine. You look tired." "Thanks, son." I accepted the steaming cup gratefully. "Just been working on this chair. Mrs. Chen wants it finished for her daughter's birthday." Marcus settled onto my workbench, careful not to disturb the scattered components. "Svetlana loved meeting you last week. She keeps asking when we can come back for dinner." The mention of her name sent a familiar pang of irritation through me, but I kept my voice even. "She seems quite taken with you." His smile widened. "Dad, I've never felt this way before. She makes me want to be better, you know? Her mother is wonderful too. So traditional, so respectful. They remind me of Grandma when I was little." I set down my coffee cup, choosing my words carefully. "Son, sometimes people aren't what they seem." The shift in Marcus's expression was immediate. His shoulders tensed, and that easy smile faded. "What do you mean by that?" "I just think you should take your time. Get to know them better before making any big decisions." "Dad, you're being unreasonable." The words came out sharper than I expected. "You barely gave her a chance. She was polite and kind, and you're already finding fault." I tried a different approach. "This isn't about blame, Marcus. It's about being careful. In my career, I learned to trust instincts." "Your instincts?" He stood up abruptly, nearly knocking over his coffee. "Or your prejudices? Is this because she's Russian? Because that's what it sounds like to me." The accusation hit me like a slap. "That's not fair, and you know it." "Is it, Dad?" Marcus's voice cracked with disappointment. "Svetlana warned me this might happen. She said some people have trouble accepting relationships with immigrants, even family." Svetlana warned him. The manipulation was so subtle, so calculated, that it took my breath away. She'd planted doubt about me before I'd even said a word. "Son, this isn't about that." "Then what is it, Dad?" "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you've already made up your mind about the woman I love." He headed toward the door, then turned back with eyes bright with unshed tears. "I thought you'd want me to be happy. Mom would have supported me. She would have given Svetlana a real chance." The garage door slammed behind him, leaving me alone with the smell of motor oil and my own regrets. Through the window, I watched his truck disappear down the street, taking with it any hope of an easy solution. I turned back to the rocking chair, my hands steadier now, despite the turmoil in my chest. Catherine's photo smiled at me from the workbench. My compass for 35 years of marriage, silent now when I needed her wisdom most. But I knew what she would say. She'd tell me to protect our son, whatever the cost. If words wouldn't convince him, evidence would. And I knew exactly who to call. 3 sleepless nights passed since Marcus stormed out of my workshop. I'd spent those dark hours staring at the ceiling, weighing my options, mentally cataloging contacts from my RCMP days. Most were retired now, scattered across the country, but some still worked in positions where they might be useful. Frank DeLuca topped the list. We'd served together in the 90s, when police work meant more legwork than computer screens. He was sharp then, the kind of investigator who could spot patterns others missed. And according to what I'd heard, he now worked for the Canada Border Services Agency. If anyone could help me quietly look into Svetlana Petrov's background, it was Frank. The Granville Island market was busy that Saturday morning, tourists mixing with locals doing their weekly shopping. I arrived early, securing a table at the back of the cafe where we could talk without being overheard. The familiar weight of clandestine business settled over me like an old coat. Frank walked in at exactly 10:30, his hair grayer than I remembered, but his bearing still upright and sharp. He spotted me instantly. Old habits die hard in our line of work. "Robert Harrison," he said, sliding into the seat across from me. "When I got your call, I thought someone was playing a joke. 20 years and suddenly you need a favor. I wouldn't ask if it wasn't important, Frank. This is about Marcus." His expression softened. He'd attended Marcus's high school graduation, sent cards every Christmas. In law enforcement, working relationships often become family bonds. "What's going on? Is he in trouble?" "Not yet, but I think he might be." I pulled out my phone and showed him the photos Marcus had shared of his dinners with Svetlana. "He's engaged to this woman, Svetlana Petrov. There's something off about her and her mother." Frank studied the images, his trained eyes, catching details I'd probably missed. "What kind of off?" I chose my words carefully. "Inconsistencies in their behavior. The way they interact doesn't feel natural, more like they're playing roles than being themselves. And some things they've said." I paused, unable to reveal my linguistic advantage. "My instincts are screaming that something's wrong." "Your instincts were always solid," Frank said, handing back the phone. "What do you need?" "Background checks on both of them. Svetlana Petrov and Irina Petrov. They claim to be from St. Petersburg originally, living in Burnaby now. I need to know if they are who they say they are." Frank nodded slowly. "Immigration status, employment history, family connections. Full assessment. I can run them through our databases, cross-reference with Interpol records. It'll take a few days for everything to come back." I slid a piece of paper across the table with their names and basic information. Approximate ages, the address Marcus had given me. I have photos, social media profiles, anything else you might need. "This stays between us," Frank said, pocketing the paper. "If I find something and it goes legal, you didn't hear it from me first." "Understood." He studied my face for a long moment. "Robert, I've seen you handle dangerous situations with ice in your veins. Right now, you look like a man who's genuinely worried. What aren't you telling me?" I met his eyes directly. "That my son is head over heels in love with someone who might be using him. And if I'm right, it's going to destroy him." Frank's expression turned serious. "I'll start running checks this afternoon. Give me 72 hours. We shook hands outside the market, and I watched him disappear into the crowd on Granville Island. For the first time in days, I felt like I was taking action instead of just reacting. The next 2 days crawled by. I threw myself into repair work, fixing radios and small electronics with an intensity that surprised my regular customers. Svetlana visited Marcus twice during that time, and I forced myself to be cordial when they stopped by the house. She played her part flawlessly, the devoted fiancée, getting to know her future father-in-law, asking about family photos, praising my woodwork. But now I watched her more closely, looking for cracks in the facade. They were there, subtle but present. The way her smile never quite reached her eyes, how she deflected conversation away from specific details about her past, the rehearsed quality of her answers to personal questions. On Thursday evening, my phone buzzed with a text from Frank. "Need to meet." Not good. My hands were steady as I called him back, but my heart was racing. Frank's voice was grim when he answered. "Robert, you were right to be suspicious." Frank's call came at 7:30 Friday morning, pulling me from the first decent sleep I'd managed all week. "We need to meet immediately," he said without preamble. "Not at the market, somewhere more private. The parking garage behind the Fairmont in downtown. Level 3, northwest corner, 20 minutes. The urgency in his voice sent adrenaline through my system. "I'll be there." He was waiting beside his sedan when I arrived, a thick manila folder under his arm. His face wore the grim expression I remembered from briefings that had gone wrong. "Get in," he said, sliding into my truck. "We need to talk where no one can overhear." Frank opened the folder, revealing documents and photographs that made my stomach clench. "Robert, your instincts were dead on. Svetlana Petrov is not who she claims to be." He handed me a database search result. Her real name is Yelena Kozlova. Svetlana Petrov is a fabricated identity she's been using for 14 months. The real Svetlana Petrov died in a car accident in Toronto 2 years ago. Somehow, Yelena obtained her documents and assumed her identity. The photograph showed the same face I'd seen at my dinner table, but the name beneath it was completely different. Identity theft? I said, the words feeling surreal. The real Svetlana Petrov was a legitimate immigrant, came to Canada as a child, no criminal record. Yelena Kozlova, on the other hand, has quite a history back in Russia. Fraud charges in Moscow, suspected involvement in a marriage scheme ring in St. Petersburg. The next revelation hit harder. Frank showed me printouts from an acting agency website based in Toronto. Headshots of Irina Petrov listed in their talent roster, specialty in character roles for corporate events and private functions. She's not her mother. Professional actress. We contacted her through the agency. She admitted that Yelena hired her for $5,000 to play her mother. The whole immigrated from St. Petersburg story was scripted. They rehearsed for 2 weeks before meeting Marcus. The engagement photos Marcus had shown me. Rented studio in Toronto. We found the same backdrop in 4 other sample portfolios online. She's done this before, Robert. The final revelation was devastating. Frank handed me a marriage certificate translated from Russian. Yelena Kozlova is currently married to a man named Dmitry Volkov in Nizhny Novgorod, Russia. 3 years, legally valid. She never divorced him. I stared at the document. Marriage fraud, among other things. Immigration fraud, identity theft, conspiracy, federal crime territory. If she marries Marcus, she could face 10 years in prison and permanent deportation. And Marcus, if he's genuinely unaware, is a victim. But if authorities think he's complicit, Frank's expression was grave. He could face charges too. I organized the documents with military precision. The evidence painted a picture of calculated deception that chilled my blood. What's our next move? Officially, I report this to my supervisors. This suggests a larger operation. Frank paused. Unofficially, you need to protect Marcus. Get him away from her before this explodes. He won't listen. He thinks I'm prejudiced. Then you need proof he can't ignore. Frank gathered up the documents. I can give you copies, but once this goes official, it's going to move fast. Federal prosecutors don't mess around with immigration fraud. I accepted the folder. Its weight felt heavier than it should. How much time do we have? Maybe a week before the investigation goes official. Frank prepared to leave, placing a hand on my shoulder. I'm sorry, Robert. I know this isn't what you wanted to find. He was right. Part of me had hoped my suspicions were wrong, that Svetlana was simply a young woman with poor social skills or cultural differences I'd misread. But the evidence was irrefutable. Looking at the documents spread across my kitchen table that night, I realized this was bigger than I'd thought. The question now was how to tell Marcus without destroying our relationship completely. The following Wednesday, I made my decision. Waiting for the official investigation wasn't an option. By then, Marcus might have already signed mortgage papers, or worse, married her. I needed to confront this head-on, but smartly. I called Marcus and asked him to come to dinner. Just the 2 of us, father and son. To my relief, he agreed, though his voice carried a wariness that hadn't been there before Svetlana. He arrived at 6, still in his work clothes, from the engineering firm downtown. My boy had grown into a good man, hardworking and honest. Catherine would have been proud. That's what made this so painful. His honesty made him vulnerable to someone like Yelena Kozlova. Dad, he said, settling into his chair at the kitchen table. What's this about? You sounded serious on the phone. I'd laid out the folder, face down. The evidence that would either save my son or make him hate me forever. Marcus, I need you to look at something. And I need you to keep an open mind until you've seen everything. His jaw tightened. If this is about Svetlana again, it is. But not the way you think. I slid the folder across the table. Before you say anything, please, just look. He opened the folder with obvious reluctance. I watched his face as he flipped through the documents. The CBSA database results. The acting agency printout showing Irina's headshot. The marriage certificate from Russia. The fraud charges from Moscow. His expression shifted from skepticism to confusion to something that looked like pain. Where did you get these? I have contacts from my years with the RCMP. I asked them to run a background check. You investigated my fiancé? His voice rose. Behind my back? I investigated someone I suspected was lying to you, and I was right. Marcus shook his head, pushing the folder away. This could be fake, manufactured. You probably paid someone to create all of this, just to break us up. Son, look at the documents. CBSA letterhead, Interpol cross-references, a marriage certificate with official Russian government stamps. You think I could fabricate all of this? I think you'd do anything to prove you were right about her. The words stung, but I pressed on. Her real name is Yelena Kozlova. She's wanted for fraud in Russia. She's currently married to a man in Nizhny Novgorod. The woman playing her mother is a hired actress from Toronto. Everything she's told you is a lie. Marcus stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. I don't believe you. Then verify it yourself. Call the acting agency. The number's right there. Ask for Irina Volkov, specialty in character roles. See what they tell you. He stared at me, breathing hard. I could see the war happening behind his eyes. The desperate need to believe in the woman he loved, fighting against the evidence in front of him. I'm going to talk to Svetlana, he finally said. I'm going to show her all of this and let her explain. Marcus, if you warn her, she'll run. She'll disappear with whatever she's already gotten from you, and you'll never see justice. Justice? He laughed bitterly. You sound like you're still on the force. This is my life, Dad, my relationship, not one of your cases. You're right. This is your life. That's exactly why I couldn't stay silent. He grabbed his jacket from the back of the chair. I need to think. I need to talk to her. Marcus, please. But he was already gone, the door slamming behind him. I sat alone at the kitchen table, surrounded by documents that told an ugly truth, wondering if I'd just saved my son or lost him forever. 3 days of silence followed. The longest 3 days of my life. I called Marcus twice, sent 4 text messages, drove by his apartment once. No response. Then, on Saturday morning, his truck pulled into my driveway. He sat in the driver's seat for a long moment before getting out. When he finally walked to the door, I could see he hadn't slept. His eyes were red, his face haggard. You were right, he said simply. I stepped aside to let him in. He collapsed onto the couch like a man who'd been carrying a weight too heavy for his shoulders. I called the acting agency. Spoke to someone who remembered hiring Irina for a family role last year. $5,000 for a month of appearances. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. They even complimented her performance. Said she was very convincing. I sat down across from him, saying nothing. He needed to tell this at his own pace. I didn't confront Svetlana, or Yelena, whatever her name is. He stared at his hands. I wanted to. I drove to her apartment 3 times, but I couldn't face her. Couldn't look at her knowing everything was a lie. What did you do? I went to the RCMP, showed them the documents you gave me. They confirmed everything. The identity theft, the marriage in Russia, all of it. They said an investigation was already underway. Marcus looked up at me, his eyes wet. She was planning to have me co-sign a mortgage. We'd looked at houses last month. She wanted something expensive. Said she'd handle the payments from her nonprofit salary. I almost signed the papers, Dad. I almost destroyed my credit, my savings, everything, for a woman who was going to leave me the moment the ink was dry. But you didn't sign. No, because of you. He wiped his eyes roughly. I'm sorry for what I said in the garage. About prejudice. About Mom. I was wrong. I moved to sit beside him on the couch, placing a hand on his shoulder the way I had when he was small and the world seemed too scary. You weren't wrong to love someone. You weren't wrong to trust. That's not a weakness, Marcus. That's what makes you a good man. I feel like such a fool. Foolish is ignoring the truth when it's right in front of you. You didn't do that. When the evidence was clear, you saw it. That takes courage. He leaned into me then, something he hadn't done since he was a teenager. We sat there for a long time, father and son, while the autumn rain began to fall outside. What happens now? He finally asked. Now the authorities handle it, and you heal. Will I have to testify? Maybe. But you're a victim here, not a criminal. Frank made sure the investigators understood that. Marcus nodded slowly. I never even suspected. She was so convincing, Dad. The stories about her childhood in Russia, her mother's sacrifices as an immigrant, her passion for helping refugees. It all felt so real. That's what makes people like her dangerous. They study their targets. They learn what you want to hear, and they become that person. It's not a reflection of your judgment. It's a reflection of their skill at deception. We talked for hours that day. About Svetlana, about Catherine, about the years I'd spent in law enforcement that I'd never discussed with him. For the first time, I told him about the undercover operations, the language training, the things I'd seen that made me cautious about trusting too quickly. I wish you'd told me, he said, about your work, about knowing Russian. Maybe I would have listened sooner. Maybe. Or maybe you would have thought I was paranoid. Some things we have to discover in our own time. The investigation moved quickly after that. Yelena Kozlova was arrested 2 weeks later, trying to board a flight to Moscow with a different passport. The hired actress cooperated fully with authorities in exchange for immunity. 3 other men across Canada came forward, all of them previous victims of similar schemes. Marcus's case became part of a larger prosecution. The trial, when it came, was brief. Faced with overwhelming evidence, Yelena pleaded guilty to immigration fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy. She was sentenced to 4 years and permanent deportation. The judge commended Marcus for his cooperation and made it clear he was considered a victim, not a participant. I sat in the back of the courtroom on sentencing day, watching my son face the woman who had tried to destroy his life. When the judge pronounced the sentence, Yelena turned and looked directly at Marcus. There was no remorse in her eyes, only anger at being caught. Marcus met her gaze without flinching. He'd grown in these months. The naive young man who'd fallen for practiced smiles and rehearsed stories had been replaced by someone wiser, more cautious, but not bitter. 6 months later, I stood in my workshop on a crisp April morning, watching Marcus sand the edges of a cedar chest. His movements were careful, deliberate, very different from the impatient young man who used to dismiss my craft as just woodworking. "Like this, Dad?" he asked, holding up the sandpaper. "Perfect, son. Your mother would be proud." Marcus smiled. A real smile, not the desperate happiness he'd worn during his time with Svetlana. He'd moved back to North Vancouver 3 months ago, not out of necessity, but by choice. "I want to remember who I am," he'd told me. "I want to remember where I come from." The transformation hadn't happened overnight. Those first weeks had been hard, filled with tears and long conversations that stretched into the early hours. Marcus had to process not just Yelena's betrayal but his own behavior toward me during their relationship. "I was so angry at you for so long," he confessed one night on the back deck. "But I think I was really angry at myself. I knew something was wrong with Svetlana. I felt it, but I ignored it because I wanted so badly to believe I'd found the one." "Love makes us vulnerable," I replied. "That's not weakness. That's being human." The healing had been mutual. I'd faced my own failures, how I'd let grief over Catherine consume me, how I'd been too passive in the face of Marcus's growing coldness. We'd both learned that love sometimes requires difficult conversations, that silence doesn't always protect. Marcus had left his engineering job downtown where Svetlana's influence had helped get him hired. Everything there reminded me of the person I was pretending to be. Now he worked for a smaller firm in North Vancouver, coming home each day with stories about bridge designs and environmental assessments, his eyes bright with genuine purpose. As for Yelena Kozlova, the aftermath had been swift. News spread quickly through the community, and several people came forward with suspicions they'd harbored but never voiced. One of her other victims, a man from Calgary, had reached out to Marcus. They'd formed an unlikely friendship, bonded by their shared experience. "He's doing better now," Marcus told me. "Getting married next fall, to someone real this time. He asked if I'd come to the wedding. Are you going?" "I think so. It feels right somehow, like closing a chapter." The response from our community surprised us both. Instead of judgment for the dramatic revelation of Svetlana's true identity, we found support. Mrs. Chen brought casseroles for weeks. Father Morrison from the church visited regularly. Even Marcus's real friends reached out, people he'd neglected during his relationship with Svetlana. "We always thought something was off about her," one admitted. "We just didn't know how to tell you." The hardest thing had been the guilt Marcus carried for 3 years of distance between us. "I chose her over you," he'd said through tears. I chose her lies over your truth. You chose what you believed was best for your future, I'd answered. That's what children do. Grow, make decisions. You couldn't have known her motives, but I should have trusted you. Now you know. That's what matters. Watching him carefully create something beautiful with his own hands, I felt a peace I hadn't experienced in years. The cedar chest he was building was a wedding gift for his friend Ashley. A real wedding built on honesty and love, not manipulation. You know, Marcus said, setting down the sandpaper, I think I understand why you love this work. Oh? Why's that? There's something honest about it. You can't fake good craftsmanship. No, I agreed. You can't fake anything that's built to last. He looked at me, his eyes filled with hard-won wisdom. Like family, I confirmed. Outside our workshop, North Vancouver settled into spring. Cherry blossoms beginning to bloom along the streets. Somewhere in this city, other families were probably struggling with their own secrets and betrayals, their own journeys toward understanding. But in that moment, surrounded by the scent of cedar and the quiet satisfaction of work done with love, I knew that sometimes the most painful decisions are also the most necessary ones. Sometimes protecting those we love means risking their hatred, and sometimes, if we're very lucky, the truth really can set us all free. Looking back on everything that happened, I've learned that stories of betrayal like ours are more common than we think. But what makes each story different is how we choose to respond when the truth finally comes to light. God taught me that sometimes loving someone means making the hardest choices. When I discovered Yelena's scheme, I could have stayed quiet to avoid hurting Marcus. But the Lord showed me that protecting someone you love sometimes means risking their anger. He works in mysterious ways, and I believe he guided me to find that evidence when Marcus needed to be saved most. This experience taught me that betrayal doesn't have to end in bitterness. Marcus and I could have let Yelena's manipulation destroy us forever. Instead, we chose forgiveness and healing. God blessed us with a second chance that many families never get. The most important lesson is this: truth and love will always triumph over lies and vengeance. When we trust in God's plan, even our darkest moments can lead us to redemption. Stories like ours prove that family bonds, when built on honesty and genuine love, are stronger than any scheme designed to tear them apart. Sometimes being a father means breaking your child's heart to save their soul. It was the hardest thing I've ever done. But watching Marcus happy and whole again reminds me that real story endings aren't always fairy tales. Sometimes they're even better because they're real. What do you think about my decision to expose the truth? Have you ever had to choose between protecting someone's feelings and telling them a painful truth? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more incredible true stories that will move your heart.